Hi everyone.
Hi, this is the Cluster API Provider AWS meeting for November 16th, 2020 at 6 p.m. GMT. Um, please be aware we're operating under the CNCF Code of Conduct, which is broadly be excellent to each other. So first of all, a few new faces. If anyone's new and want to introduce themselves, feel free to speak up. Please use the raise hand feature if you can. Um, yeah, does anyone want to introduce themselves or not? Yeah.
So I'm trying to find the raise hand feature.
Oh, that's right. You can go ahead. We don't have many
Okay.
people on the call.
Hi everyone. My name's Aina Ochulo. It's my first time here. I just started looking at Cluster API. I work for VMware, and so yeah, I want to learn more about Cluster API and hopefully how to add more value to the community.
Excellent.
Hobbies: I like soccer, and so yeah, I watch it, I play it. So yeah, that's it.
Cool. Welcome. Yeah. If there's anyone else, or I think everyone else is familiar. All right, so PSAs, last week released version 0.6.2. No new features, primarily stability release, a couple of bug fixes. So nothing too exciting there. Just report back from Rich Case, who's not able to make it today. Working on the E2E tests for the EKS controllers, which we want to sort of do before we start adding loads of new features to EKS. Make sure it's stable for folks. Um, Thirdly, there's a discussion happening on Thursday at 2 p.m. GMT, and that's around using federated OIDC identity-wide Kubernetes service account tokens. If that's anyone interested, so that's a method by which if you have turned on service account token volume projection, which should be on by default, I think next in 120, then you can potentially use the CA certificate with AWS and be able to automatically exchange your Kubernetes service account for a AWS identity, which opens some interesting things around doing provisioning across accounts. So we weren't planning to implement that just yet as part of the multi-tenancy, but there's some folk that are interested in it. So if anyone's interested, that's at 2 p.m. I know that's pretty early, but we wanted to do it before KubeCon talks, which are later on in the afternoon, basically. If anyone's around and is interested, then feel free to come up. Um, that's it for the PSAs. Please, if you've got any agenda items, put them in the doc. Um, I'll just take the first one. So on the V1 Alpha 4 network API, which I haven't even linked to in here, we've had a meeting to solidify requirements. I will just get a link to the document. So we're pretty set on what the requirements should be. And I'm unable to share my screen today. I've got perfect audio, inability to share my screen. It's always something about Zoom that isn't working. uh, so in terms of requirements, I will just throw a link. Right, just put a link there. Basically, about we are definitely going to be breaking up the AWS cluster object into constituent reproceed parts. There's some open questions. So right now there's a proposal around the load balancers for cluster API as a whole, and we need to provide an integration point. And also there's a question around UX, because once we break down the AWS cluster into more resources, then that creates potentially a lot of boilerplate for people to spin up new clusters. And I've just thrown a link to a brainstorming document that's been started by Vince Pinano around how we can improve the user experience in Cluster API as a whole. So it's very much we're a case where we've got overlapping API concerns between two other proposals, which need to be resolved. That's why I've not spent a whole lot of time working on it. But we're working on solidifying the load balancer proposal over the next 2 weeks. So I guess we will iterate on that for the network API as well. I'm just checking last week as well. I think we had some discussion about other parts that we wanted to do for Rerun Alpha 4. Does anyone want to speak to that? I think there was something around the AMI lookup. Is anyone around who can speak to that? No. Is there any questions that people have, or anything anyone wants to bring up at all? Very quiet meeting today. Just answer to Jonathan's question around Firefly's note taker. It's not a new feature. It's someone keeps sending in this note-taking AI thing that scours Google Docs and the GitHub community repos and figures out how to get into the Kubernetes meetings. I think it's just data collection. We've tried to get rid of it in the past and it keeps coming back. That's what's that about. Sedef.
Yeah, about E2E EKS edition. So I see a large refactoring in our E2E test. So is the changes on the EKS side will follow that PR? Do you know?
Yes, that's precisely the point. So we originally had the different tests separated by using a Jinko focus, but it makes more sense to actually do them as separate packages. So you can just do like a Jinko test this package and have that. So I think that's a cleaner way to do the test. So that's what Rich has been working on. So once that PR's in, I think he's got a fast follow. I think he's already done quite a lot of work to get the EKS test. So that will just be a follow-up PR.
Sounds good. I'll try to review that.
Thanks. Jonathan.
What's the difference between the load balancer provider and like the cloud provider that gets bundled with a kubelet or as an add-on?
Yeah, so this is for the control plane load balancer. So which is prior to the cluster being created. So you need, and it's less of a concern for us directly because you quite normally have right now we use ELB. We'd like to use NLB in the future, but if you're using VMC on AWS, for example, then you're going to have a vSphere cluster, but you might want to use an AWS NLB to back it. So how do you go about doing that? So this is some work that's being done by Equinix, Jason, primarily adjacent to Tiberius, and to provide a consistent API for that will cover bare metal vSphere environments in the various guises. We could potentially, if people want to have a reason to use ELB or NLB, I know there's some people in COTS have an explicit preference around how their control plane load balancer works. Is to address that. And the other thing around the CPI is very much supposed to work inside a cluster. It has no idea around the multi-tenancy or provisioning something in a VPC that's external to itself. So that's why these are going to be cluster API constructs. Prakash.
Yeah, I would like to know, since you mentioned end-to-end test, I had seen that in the Sonoboy previously. So it had Gingo and it had one more library, I forget it, but is this a ground up effort you're doing for EKS? Or is it just an improvement on what exists? And how was it different from, how is it different for different providers? Any idea on that?
Yeah, so it's quite different. It's a bit different. So it's two different things. So if we're talking about Sonobuoy, then that's really about conformance testing for a already provisioned cluster. Now, we're not able to use Sonobuoy directly because of some. So Cluster API has a test framework around spinning up a cluster and then running tests on it. There are Go module clashes that allow us not to be able to use Sonobuoy directly. So unfortunately, Cluster API test framework has re-implemented some of Sonobuoy to be able to run kubetest. So Sonobuoy ultimately runs kubetest from the Kubernetes repository to run the conformance test. But that's only one part of testing. We also do want to run provider-specific testing around our load balancers for the control plane created with the right name. How does Cluster API provider AWS behave when you create too many resources? Those are things which are not related to conformance, but they are related to the behavior of the provider within a specific infrastructure provider. So that's why the Cluster API test framework does do conformance testing. That's only one aim of it, and we're not going to run it for EKS because there's no point. We know EKS is Kubernetes conformance, so we're not going to run conformance tests on it again. But what we do want to test is, can it bring up a cluster correctly? Can it join the nodes? So that kind of behavior we do want to test.
Is there a link you can put it which I can review? Because definitely I'm interested. I have done at least conformance test. Does this include mock and all that? Additional mock libraries? Or is it just assertions only?
KubeMock, no, we could add something around KubeMock to the Cluster API test framework. There isn't anything in there at the moment. The test framework basically wraps the cluster cuddle and allows you to programmatically test the creation, upgrades of clusters, deletions of clusters. I know Sedef did quite a lot of work on it and has raised their hand, so I will let Sedef speak on that.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. So what it means is in that case, you are saying that you are adding scenario for load balancer testing in this case, or is it for UI? Which is the target in this case for?
We're testing the provider. We're testing the behavior of the Cluster API AWS provider. Does it build clusters correctly or not? And can it? How does it deal with rate limiting? Like, does the CloudFormation stuff actually work? Those are things which are completely separate to conformance and are that have to happen before we can even get to conformance testing. Like, there's no point running conformance testing unless we know we can actually build the resources on AWS first. So that's kind of what we want to test.
Okay, got it. So is there a link on the meeting notebook so that I can review it and maybe comment something?
I'm just going to throw a link to the repository.
Okay.
It's best to actually just look at the code, I think. There isn't like a whole lot of documentation on the test framework itself.
But the codes are there, right? So we can directly review on the code. No problem. I don't need a document. I can review the code.
Okay.
Okay, appreciate that. It was really good to hear that. Something more than what I know and probably can contribute if possible. Let me see. I want to lower my hand. I'm not able to do it. I don't know why. Okay, but you can assume that it is. Yeah.
Xiao, you've got a question about permission boundary and Bootstrap template.
Yeah, so I found when we bootstrap the cluster, EKS cluster, the Bootstrap template didn't have a permission boundary. So I was thinking to add that flag to specify a permission boundary. So I would like to know, should what do you guys think? Because because I was trying to use it in our system, and we have some limitation. Says if the IAM policy didn't have permission boundary, we won't allow it to create it. So this, I don't know if this is a feature that the community also needed.
Yeah, I've not used the permission boundary stuff much. That's kind of like after I stopped doing my AWS training. I think I'd be interested. Maybe, so we have mechanisms. You can make features optional in cluster AWS ADM. So maybe start the issue on PR, and then we can see how it can fit in. And maybe we just do it by default, or otherwise we might need to do maybe some flag that you set, and then it does the permission boundary. But I'm always open to anything that improves the security of cluster
Sure.
by AWS.
Yeah, I'll create the issue for that. Thanks.
Cool. Anything else? Otherwise, nope. Okay. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm a bit out of date on updating the video links, so I'll upload the last 3 meetings into YouTube and put links in the docs and in Slack. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good 2 weeks. Thanksgiving if you're doing that. See you then. Bye.